All right, here we are again. Our Christian Minson at your service, coming to you from Rythmia, Guanacaste, Costa Rica. Sunny and warm today. Welcome everybody as you join on. If you are viewing the recording, just know that about the first 4 minutes or so, 4 to 5 minutes, I'm just preparing for people to come on live. So you can skip right through to the first 4 minutes, and then we'll get into the content. Right now, Tina is the first one to show up on my screen as joined. So as you join, say hi. Tell me where you're from. I know where Tina's from, Finland already. She's a regular, been here before. Susan, hey. And of course, Tina is saying hello from Finland. And hello to those in the office here. Sylvia's coming in, one of our media coordinators here. Yeah, Sylvia, why don't you come in and say hi to everybody? She's a little shy, but
Camera shy. I like to be behind the camera.
yeah, she likes to be behind the camera. She does a lot of the filming of everything that goes on around here. And so here in the media room, it's where we have the Rythmia Live studios, as well as the post-production media stuff. Anyway, Marie Rose, hey Rose, she's just speaking to Rose by Facebook this morning. Welcome everyone. As you come in, say hi, tell me where you're from. And now that we're going to get started here in just a few minutes, Rythmia exists here in Costa Rica, a place that's sunny, warm, about 364 days of the year. It's really sunny and warm every day of the year, or not necessarily sunny, but it's always warm. We're approaching the end of the rainy season. Right now, it looks like it may end a little bit sooner than is scheduled. I think November 15th is the official end of the rainy season, but they can always get a little rain before or after. And the rain here is very pleasant. It's warm, and it usually comes in intermittent stages. So it'll rain a little, then it'll stop, and you can enjoy, walk around, it'll rain again. But let's see, Tracy, Rose, who else? Tyler, Christina, hello, where are you coming from, Christina? Maria is coming from the UK. I love the international crowd here. We're looking at the stats. Most of the people that come to Rythmia come from California. The second most come from Canada. I think it's Florida and Texas or New York. And then, but we have people from all over the world that come here, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Finland, of course. We've got a guy here from Finland now. We've had Norway, Sweden, Iceland even, Canada, as I mentioned, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, and people from Costa Rica here. Let's see, who else? Danon from Hawaii, beautiful. North Florida, Rick, beautiful. Mel, welcome. And where are we at? 103. I'm going to give us all about 30 more seconds, and then we'll get fully started here. Vedra Beach, Florida, huh? All right. Haven't heard of that, where that is. I've been to a number of places in Florida, but not there. All right, so here we go. Well, we're at about 4 minutes in, which is where I like to start. Mel's coming in from New Mexico, beautiful. I'll be there in March with Greg Braden, just so you know, if you want to go to his Cell to Soul there. So welcome officially, everybody, to Rythmia Live, Facebook, every Friday. I'm here with you, our Christian Minson. Your catalyst for transformation and awakening. I'm the director of the breathwork program here. I'm a certified transformational breath facilitator, senior trainer for the last 12 years, sharing breathwork all around the world. And now for the last year, coming up pretty much on my year anniversary here at Rythmia. And those who work here say the real feel is about 4 to 1. You know how the temperature says it's 75 degrees, but real feel is like 89. Well, here, 1 week of living here at Rythmia, real feel is about 4 weeks. So I've been here a year. The real feel is about 4 years. But that's because a lot of transformation happens here. A lot of life happens, gets compressed into 1 week. And that's why people come, because it's really an efficient and effective process, of which myself and the breath work are a part. So today we're talking about, the title today is Big Kids Do Cry. And of course, this is the antithesis of big boys, big girls don't cry. You've heard that before, probably. What we're talking about really is the role of not just crying, but all of our emotions in our lives. And hopefully you can't hear Sylvia back there. She's rummaging around. So, why is this important? You know, emotions, when we talk about the subject of emotions, emotions are really an integral part of our life experience, right? If you think about it, we have a physical body, we also have a mental body, an emotional body, and even a spiritual body. And from my experience, I didn't mention in the beginning, but many of you know that I was a monk for 10 years of my life. And through that training, I learned that we really have to develop these bodies uniformly. You're physical, you know, you can be physically strong, but if you're emotionally weak, well, it's, you know, just as a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. You may have heard that before, right? Well, just so we are only as strong as our weakest body. So you may have you may be very physically strong and maybe mentally alert, but if you're emotionally decrepit, then that's your weakness, and you can get taken down as easily as somebody who's a very physically weak, maybe, but intellectually superior, or you know, emotionally on point. So, you know, we've heard, you probably heard in your life, don't cry, or keep a stiff upper lip, or don't show your anger. Even, you may have even said, don't be so loud and boisterous. Don't be so happy, right? This really, by suppressing our feelings, we're really stunting our emotional growth. There's a new term out there, I mean, relatively new, let's say, last many years, called emotional intelligence, which is really an attempt to measure the emotional body, right? We have IQ, which is our intellectual intelligence, essentially, our intelligence quotient. But our EQ is really there to show us, to bring to attention how vitally important it is to have some kind of emotional development and emotional ability. And basically this comes from a healthy expression of our emotions versus suppression or subversion of those emotional states. The storing of these energies leads ultimately to physical dysfunctions, chronic pain, inability to enjoy life, even sexual dysfunction or disconnection from your body, and ultimately disease, and, you know, in the truly ultimate sense, death. All of this can come from this suppressed emotional energy, and this is a lot of what we deal with here at Rythmia. This is a lot. This is primarily what I dealt with in the 12 years that I've been a breath work facilitator and trainer. The 10 years prior as a monk, really working to understand how this dimension of our lives is so vital and critical. So this is why we're getting into this, all right? Let me just check in and see more people just saying hi. I'm just gonna say a blanket hi to everybody. John Scott and Shelley, both good friends now. John Scott was just here. Shelley will come here eventually. I've known Shelley for 10 years of my life now, probably 12. So welcome. Let's see. So what are we talking about? What are emotions? Emotions really are the color of life, if you think about it. I often use the metaphor of a painter. Imagine that you are a painter and you want to paint this landscape and you really want to capture its essence, its beauty. But you're only allowed to paint with red and blue, right? Or those are the only colors you brought, right? You couldn't afford any other colors. Well, that painting is probably not going to be as expressive as it could be, as expressive as it could if you had all the colors: yellow, green, red, blue, whites, and even blacks. And this is the blacks, the grays, the white against that, the contrast of all these colors and shades is really what brings the painting to life, that really captures the vividness of the scene, right? And so if you think about it, it's all of our emotional states combined are really what brings life's quality to its full fruition. The colorfulness of life is a combination of all of these emotional states. So to try to hoard certain emotions like happiness or peace, and yet be try to run away or not accept anger or sadness or other emotions is really like deciding you're going to throw away the yellow and the green and only work with the blue and the red. So emotions are the color of life. Emotions are also important because they deliver information to us, right? They deliver information really about what matters in our lives. So when we are sad, there's usually, it's usually an indication that something that matters to us is not quite right, which, instead of trying to suppress the sadness, is go into what that is and how we could make that better. And sometimes making it better is just the expression of the sadness. Sometimes the sadness is just an honoring of what we've had, but what we no longer have, which is the case with grief. And grief is probably one of the most abused states these days. We just try not to experience it, and yet it is such a natural state in the expression of our care for something that we've lost. Maybe a position in our life, that may be a situation or just some information. Grief is real and needs to be experienced. So when we think about our emotions too, our emotions are really communication from our heart. Our mind, our intelligence is a communication from our mind. And from my spiritual background, the communication from our heart is really more directly connected to our soul. This is our intuitive nature, our intuition, our knowing, our inherent knowing, the sixth sense, you might say, is really the heart communication. The mind is a very learned communication. It's the intelligence of the mind is very linear. It's very slow. It's very it's based on perception of the senses, which often can lead us astray. So emotions really are faster than the intellect for delivering us, faster and more effective at delivering us true information. And for all you computer people out there, I use a good analogy. We're all connected to the internet these days, and hopefully people are savvy enough to understand that you can have a wired connection. They call it DSL cable. Now the latest that I'm aware of anyway of connecting, the fastest speed connection is to have a fiber optic cable. This is actually a fiber, like a glass fiber, where information travels at super speeds. So if we're using the analogy there, information that we get from the mind is like downloading information to our computer off a DSL cable. You can get what they say, and my numbers are going to be incorrect, but for sake of comparison, you can get anywhere from 5 to 100 megabytes per second. 100 megabytes per second, close to max going through that DSL cable. So this is, it's a considerable amount of information. But when you compare it to fiber optic cable, fiber optic can get 5 to 50 to maybe even 100 gigabytes per second. Like megabytes, mega I think is, I don't even know now, 1,000 or million bytes, and giga is just the next. If it's 1,000, giga would be a million. If it's a million, giga is going to be like a billion bytes per second. So exponentially higher amount of information can be downloaded in seconds using the fiber optic cable. And so our emotional receptors are like getting information from that fiber optic cable. And we've all experienced this, even if you haven't been conscious of it. You go into a room, a club, or a party or something like that. Your mind is like checking everybody out. It's like, who's here, what's going on, or what activities are going. It's assessing stuff slowly and linearly. Your heart is saying instantly, you don't belong here. This is not a safe place for you. You don't know what, your mind is trying to catch up to this information, but your heart already knows instantly whether it's a good place or not for you to be. And so this is your intuition speaking. This is the language of your emotions at its highest calling. So hopefully that gives you some understanding of what our emotions are and what they're good for. Marcella is saying, hola, Rose, joy and sorrow. You cannot experience one without having the experience of the other. That's so true, and the grief subject is super relevant to me right now. The expectation from others for it to be suppressed. Yeah, Marie, great that you're on this call then, you're on this Facebook Live, because my very emphatic suggestion, I want to say advice, but I don't like to give advice really, is let yourself feel. It's important to feel your grief, and it's important to, when somebody tries to say, oh, it's okay, you've got your life to look forward to, or it's not so bad that you lost this, look at you got this, you say thank you very much, but don't try to help. You say thank you very much, but I need to honor my feelings right now. And it is important, one, because if you don't express your grief in when you're having it, it's not like if you suppress it, it goes away. You suppress it, it sits there like a ticking time bomb under a pressurized container. And eventually that grief is going to explode in your life. And usually that's a very inopportune time. And like I said earlier, that can cause physical discomforts, it can cause disease, it can ultimately cause death if it's extreme enough, when the suppression of the emotions is extreme enough. So I won't get into, when we're talking about how to express our emotions, some ways to help that grief along so that you can experience it authentically and yet not let it overpower you, hopefully. So thanks for that. Rose says, your body will store your grief if you don't deal with it. Yeah, exactly. Bob Walker joined up. Hey, Bob. Bob's been here before. All right, so how do we deal with this? How do we really work with the emotions? And that's what I want to get into next. Sometimes our emotions just have to kick us in the pants, and I like to reveal a story, sort of a vulnerable story of my own. dealing with my own family and my father especially. I can remember, when I was little, probably 5 or 6. I was sitting on the floor crying about something, and he comes over and says, "You want to cry? I'll give you something to cry about." With his hand raised high in the air, and all that did was startle me, make me bawl even more. His hand came down to swat me. I jumped up and I ran down the hall, jumped in the bathroom, closed and locked that door, and just sat there bawling in the bathroom. Of course, he comes over, bangs on the door. It's like, "Let me in." Of course, I'm not going to let him in. He's yelling angrily at there, "Big boys don't cry, get yourself together." And, it wasn't until he got bored and finally gave up and left that, I was able to calm down enough and get out. But, and I want to make a point that, my father wasn't an evil man or a monster. He was just a product of a generation that learned and passed on the unfortunate, erroneous wisdom that big boys don't cry. That became etched in my consciousness and became the guiding principle of my life. That, in fact, he was a military man, and so I was raised in a military family. Military, the Greek military were the Stoics, and that word Stoic means to be emotionless, to be devoid of emotion and feeling. Because if you are, the Stoics were war machines. They got their job done, and they did it very well. So if you're going to be a war machine, if you're going to be a killer, you have to let some part of your humanity die. You cannot feel for your enemy, or you cannot feel for somebody else if you're planning on annihilating them. So this became the guiding principle, and I became more or less the dry-eyed poster child for big boys don't cry, and held myself firm. But this was when I was 6, and all through my life. Flash forward to like 30 years later, and I find myself crying in a bathroom again. Ironically, this was on Father's Day in church one day. Now it's probably, this has been about 10 years ago, 12, 15 years ago in my life. So what was going on, half hour earlier, I was sitting in church watching the minister give the sermon on, it was Father's Day, so he was making some grand sweeping ideas about God as the Father, and how we should obey and this and that. And I was more interested in how I could get out of there and what I was going to eat in the potluck lunch afterwards. But needless to say, I was getting bored, but I was very unprepared for what the minister was going to say next. And what he did say ended up changing the way I view my life, my father, and the way I express my emotions forever. So he, because it was Father's Day, he said, the relationship with our father is a sacred one. And he said, to conclude today, I wanted to read a poem from a father to his son who had been called to war back in World War II, and he'd been called overseas. And the father was a military father. The son was obviously in the military and was overseas. And the minister pulled this poem out of his pocket and began to read. And I have it here some. It said, son, it's a funny thing how close a war can really bring a father who for years with pride has kept his emotions deep inside. So as he was speaking, I was beginning to connect with this poem. I said, So he said he was a military father. My father was in the military. He kept his emotions deep inside and trained me to do the same. I began to wonder, could he actually have been the father in this poem? Could he have expressed himself in this way? And then the minister continued to read the poem, which said, "I'm sorry, son, that when you were small, I let reserve build up that wall. I told you real men never cried, and it was mom who always dried your tears and smoothed your hurts away so that soon you went back out to play." So, now the room starts getting a little emotional. I look over to the side, and the usher who was sitting next to me starts reaching for a hanky, and I just thought to myself, what a crybaby. Again, this stoic visage that I learned how to keep all these years. But to my surprise, I felt a little bit of moisture welling up in my eyes too, which I attributed to the pollen in the air. I was like, this isn't getting to me. But then the minister continued with the next verse. He said, "But son, deep down inside, within my heart, I long to have some little part in drying that small tear-stained face. But we were men, and men don't embrace." So at this point, alarm bells started going off in my head. Beep, 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 emotion alert, get ready for full meltdown. What was going on inside of me was I was caught in this torment between seeing both sides of the perspectives. Once from that child who had yearning to experience this kind of emotional connection with his father, which I didn't feel like I really had. But then at the same time, from the perspective of the father, as he had spent so many years shut down in his emotion, and how he represented many fathers out there who felt trapped in their indoctrination of this stoic definition of what it means to be a man. That to suppress or to deny the very feelings that make us human was how we were raised, and how they were raised from their fathers before them, and how they were raised from their fathers before them. So the minister ended up concluding the poem by saying, well, somehow pride and what is right have changed their places here tonight. And I find my eyes won't stay quite dry, and that men sometimes really do cry. And so at this point, with that admission from this father whose son was so far away, and there I was dealing with my own relationship to this poem, and how it affected me so deeply in my relationship with my father. I couldn't keep my composure anymore, so I got up quickly and I went to the bathroom, locked myself in one of the stalls, and just started bawling my eyes out. The tears just kept flowing and flowing, and I was probably in there for 15 or 20 minutes. Just something had released. This poem had gotten to me, and all of that emotion that I'd been storing for all those years finally came running down. And there I was again, a 6-year-old boy crying in the bathroom. It transported me back to that time. And then after crying for what seemed to be an eternity, I came out of the stall. I sort of splashed water on my face, and I stood there looking at myself in the mirror, just gazing into my eyes, and completely mesmerized by this cathartic transformation that had happened, this opening, this new sense of freedom as I'd released this burden of all this years of holding on to that. And then, of course, I reached for the paper towels to to dry my face off, and they didn't have any, so I had to try to use the hot air blower, and that was a mess. That didn't work out too well. But, you know, I cried that day out of release. I released years of emotional baggage, years of this pent-up energy. I cried that day out of compassion for the father in this story, compassion for my father, compassion for all men who find themselves locked in this self-imposed prison, of emotional stoicism. And I ultimately cried that day out of hope, hope for our society that runs dangerously close to being completely disconnected from ourselves and from our feelings and from each other, and hope that if I could be inspired by one man, this father who wrote this poem, one man who had the courage to step out of his training, out of his conditioning, and be affected. This man could step out of his conditioning and help me see the light. Then I felt like the hope that I could, by allowing myself to express my feelings, could affect others and to help all men break free from their binds. And not only men, but even the women. So that's why we call this Big Kids Do Cry today. So, maybe big boys, big kids don't cry, because from my experience, to express that kind of authentic emotion takes growing up into a man or growing up into a woman. And then we have, when we're truly a man or truly a woman, we're in our full authenticity to be able to express ourselves and our emotions as needed. So hopefully that gives you some perspective on this. And let me just see. Christina saying, how might one raise their baseline of happy in themselves and so avoid severe prolonged negative emotion? All right, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. John Scott, at work, one earphone, laugh out between incoming calls. Painful emotions start to build, then I feel like I shift to a neutral place and have to start again. It's all right. It's kind of like bubbles. Emotions bubble up, and if you ever tried to get bubbles out of something you've pasted onto a paper and try to get bubbles out, sometimes the bubbles, you start to work them out and then they move off to the side. And so you just got to keep working with them there. Christina, can you discuss more about breathwork at Rythmia? How does it correlate to emotions? And yes, so that's gonna be how I answer your other question. So my story really was there to emphasize that sometimes life provides the means. If we've been backed up for so long, sometimes there'll be something, the straw that breaks the camel's back, that finally opens the floodgates. But there are conscious ways to work with our emotions too. And because I am the breathwork expert, I've been working with the breath as our main tool for helping with emotional expression and emotional release. I feel like it has a super powerful role to play. If you think about it, I subscribe to the holographic nature of life, which means that any part of our experience has a correlation to the greater whole of our experience. And our breath is one of those things. And you can, I'd say most people really subscribe to this if you believe in foot reflexology or iridology, reading of the eyes, or even astrology, reading of the stars. It's to say that all these things have a correspondence with each other, with our lives. And our breath is no different. The way we breathe has a direct relationship to the way we experience life and how we experience our emotions. And consider this, when we have an emotion, when you have an emotion that you don't want to have, that you don't like, what do you typically do? Right? We tense up, we contract, you hold your breath, right? It's a held breath, it's a held, contracted physical state. And so this pattern, or you might, if you do breathe, you're going to breathe very shallow and perhaps very rapidly. And see if that, being an empath, picking up other people's emotions, learning how to tell what emotions are yours and what is not yours. So challenging. You're picking, no, got off track with that comment. Let me say that our breath, we hold the breath and we breathe very shallow, and this breath pattern corresponds to these emotions that we typically don't like: fears, anxiety, stress. And the rub of this equation, as Shakespeare might say, is that if we start to habituate ourselves to this breath pattern, this shallow breathing or this continuous sort of held pattern, we actually start to induce those emotional states in our being. And we can actually become chronically stressed or chronically anxious because our breathing is reinforcing those emotional states. Now, fortunately, with our breathing, the reverse is true, that we can induce states of well-being, states of peace, states of happiness by learning to breathe in a pattern that reinforces those emotional states. And what is that pattern? Well, that's the pattern that we typically use in the breath work that I teach, the breath work that we use here at Rythmia. And that pattern is a full breath, a free breath, meaning relaxed, and a fluid breath, a flowing breath, meaning it's continuous and always in motion. Full, nice deep breath, in contrast to that shallow or held breath. A free breath, relaxed, in contrast to the held or the tense part. And fluid, meaning it's always in motion, in contrast to the held or stiltedness of the breath, in these less desirable emotional states. So part of the process is really to habituate ourselves to this, to practice this full, free, flowing breath pattern. And in that, we start to develop holographically, that influences the greater context of our lives and how we experience our emotions. Now, the other thing it does is helps us to really let go of resistance. So what is resistance and why am I talking about this? Consider that in any emotional state, it's actually not the emotion so much that's causing the pain, but it's our resistance to that emotion. Resistance is friction. Something's moving. If it has friction, it doesn't move so well, right? By resisting, we're stopping the motion of this emotion. E meaning energy, motion, in motion, energy in motion. So by resistance, we're stopping the energy in motion. We're stopping the flow of this emotion and holding it in. And in that heldness, in that resistance, is our experience of the pain or the suffering. And so what breath work does, by getting into this fluid, repetitive breath pattern, it helps us to pry open our claws and let go of this emotional energy and let it be free. Let it flow freely. And there's a very important part that happens in this point. As we open up and let our emotions start to be free, they actually come across the threshold of our consciousness, and we will temporarily re-experience these emotions. We will feel those emotions again. And this is the tricky part, because when people feel these emotions, they're like, I didn't want to feel these emotions in the first place. That's why I tried to suppress them. The problem with that is unexpressed emotions never die. As Sigmund Freud, the great psychotherapist, said, unexpressed emotions never die. They just reemerge in darker and uglier ways. They usually leak out in some kind of way and create a darkness or a morbidness to your life that influences your decisions and your relationships and everything about your life. So just by suppressing that emotion doesn't mean you're done away with it. It means that you're actually carrying that energy with you wherever you go, and it's continuing to influence you for the negative. So we want to let go of that emotion, and it may mean re-experiencing it temporarily. Now here's where, again, breath work can really help because, I mean, we can experience our emotions just naturally, but often the experience of them is a little more intense, and often it takes, you know, a longer amount of time to process that emotional energy. By working with the breath in a specific way when we have an emotion come up, we can actually learn to reduce the intensity of the experience of that emotion, and we can also reduce the amount of time we have to be in that emotion. So this is speaking to grief, which I think it was Christina, I believe, yeah, who was talking about that earlier, or Christina's talking about, you know, how you raise the baseline of happy so as to avoid severe and prolonged negative emotion. And this is it. By experiencing the emotion, by letting the emotion go, you know, by holding on to it, we prolong the negativity because we keep that negativity cycling in our consciousness. By letting go, we start to let that emotion flow, and emotions are like weather patterns. You know, this is great because here in Costa Rica, it's been raining a bit. Rain comes in, it dumps. It might rain for 2 hours, it might rain for 2 days, it might rain for 2 weeks, but the rain will always end. It never rains forever, right? So if you think about that in terms of emotion, sadness may come in. You might be sad for 2 hours, you might be sad for 2 days, you might be sad for 2 weeks, but that sadness will eventually end. And if you can employ this breathing to help you move that sadness along, you could actually reduce it from 2 weeks to potentially a week or even a couple of days. So when I advise people to breathe with their emotions in a particular way. And this helps us not only to express our emotions, but to really help us integrate that emotional energy, to release it and let it finally flow into the channels it was meant to. And this is that we have to remember to breathe with our emotions. So when you have, let's just take sadness, because we're talking about big kids do cry. We'll talk about crying. It's a very typical and common one. You want to express your emotion on the exhale. You know, so you cry on the exhale, but then you remember to take another inhale. The inhale draws in new, fresh life force energy. The inhale is helping usher out that old stagnant energy and giving you a new lease on life, essentially. So you inhale, and then you exhale. Exhale and express. Inhale, exhale and express. As you can see, there's a cycle going on here. Old energy going out, new energy coming in. As opposed to if you watch people cry who are crying unconsciously, they'll typically go like this. They're crying, they're fully in the experience of that emotion, but the energy is locked up. It's not moving. It's sort of just cycling right there in their heart space. And you could cry like this for hours and days and never actually get rid of that emotion or let that emotion come to completion. It's only when you start opening up, there's a resistance there. You know, what's going on subconsciously is that you're crying, but in your mind you're saying, I don't want this. I don't want this sadness. I don't want this pain. So you're offering that resistance. That resistance is stopping the flow of that emotion, and therefore you're caught in the cycle of that emotion. And that's just going to cycle and cycle and cycle till you finally let go and you can let it move on. So the idea is inhale, fresh energy, exhale, express on the exhale, and always remember to inhale again. And you do this as long as it takes for your emotion to express. All right, so, and I typically, we do, of course, we do this in breathwork sessions. So people sit down, they come in, they've stored their emotions sometimes for decades, and finally we get into this thing and it unlocks something, and they have this emotional catharsis. When you're relatively clear, I've been working with this process for a long time. I'm not saying that I still don't have, some emotional baggage in there, but how I use it more these days is in real time. Real life, even if you've cleaned out your closets of all this stored emotion, still life has a way of introducing new, less than happy experiences to you. And if that's the case, when that's the case for me, like it hits me with something that makes me a bit anxious. Well, I'll just take a moment in that anxiety. I'm feeling it then. That's the best time to start employing this breath technique. Inhale, exhale, feel the anxiety. Inhale, exhale, feel the anxiety. Replace it with an inhale, exhale. And I'll go that way. Typically, it'll take 15 minutes, 30 minutes. I don't even have to go, full hour like we do in our therapeutic sessions to move that emotion along. The advantage to this is, one, it's fresh. I'm dealing with the emotion while it's on the surface, so I don't even give it a chance to get stored. And two, then I'm not carrying this energy around with me for weeks or months before finally letting it go, allowing it to wreak havoc in my life until I finally do let it go. So let's see if people are getting this. I'm similar to Mel. You're not alone. Didn't smell. Being an empath, yeah. Now I want to say something about empaths here. Well, I'll say that in a second. Let me just, we're doing a preschool. We love every emotion that arises and breathes. Good, Halima, I believe that's your name, huh? We're teaching the children to love every emotion that arises and breathe with the sun in a new preschool paradigm. Thank you for sharing. You make me so happy to hear that actually is happening. That's what I say we need. I wish I had when I was a kid. I have breathed youngsters as young as 4 years old. I breathed people as old as 94 years old. And with youngsters, you can see, even at 4 years old, the kind of trauma that disrupts their natural fluid breathing pattern. And so it's really important. The younger we learn this, the more we have a natural tool for dealing with the ups and downs of life. What's the consequence there? Well, think about the dysfunctional ways we deal with this. We retreat inward. We start using drugs and alcohol. We flog ourselves with self-deprecating thoughts and such. So to use this at an early age, I can't tell you how happy that makes me feel. Raising the baseline. Hi, Christian. Love your spirit. Thank you, Marina. Melanie joined. Yay. Kelly Jean. Breathe in through the mouth and release the emotion from the nose. In our process, I typically breathe in and out through the mouth. You can experiment. I mean, when we go into a formal breathwork session, that's how we do it. Everyday life breathing tends to be more nose oriented, and I recommend that. If you're working with your emotions, the thing about breathing through the mouth is it's going to process more oxygen, which more life force energy, which is going to help move that emotion along quicker. That's my advice. Crying will be progress, but I'll keep that in mind. Yeah. Christine, I get behind this, look at my experience in hindsight, and after a huge energy release, I'm exhausted. Then realize the renewed sense of emotional reset. Exactly. It takes some energy. Basically, what you're feeling is the exhaustion of all the energy it's taken hold on to that emotion. Just the emotion is energy in motion. To hold down that energy in motion takes more energy. You know, it takes energy to keep energy in place. When you finally release it, you have a contrast. You finally have a relaxed state, and you realize how tense and how uptight and how much energy you've been expending to hold that all that time, and then, you know, then you feel exhausted. I pressed the emoji by mistake. Yeah, good. We don't only carry this life trauma with us. Some of us are dealing with many lives and ancestral trauma too. Yep. Well, that's the case. Melanie saying, listening to what I'm unpacking, focusing on my breath through the process. What were you gonna say about empaths? So about empaths here. And Panache Desai said this, and he clearly stated what I believe, but perhaps wasn't able to articulate. But we're all empaths, okay? Empathy and our ability to feel other people's feelings is an inherent to our spiritual nature, which is all of us. Now, when people usually say they're empaths, it means that they haven't learned to harness the power of their empathy yet, which means that they let other people's energy influence their energy. This is a choice, all right? It's a choice, and it's like learning to use your muscles. It's like learning to play the violin. You're learning how to work with your power of empathy. Empathy is a spiritual superpower. And, you know, at first it can be very unwieldy. And if you don't know how to use it properly, you can get inundated with other people's feelings. So first of all, recognize that it is a choice. You don't have to take on other people's feelings, and that you do have the power to control it. Otherwise, if you choose not to take this viewpoint, you're a victim. And as long as you're a victim, you're powerless, meaning you will always be subjugated to the power of your environment over yourself and over your will. And I know that none of us are powerless. We all have the power to overcome in any situation. So I want you to realize that when you talk about empathy, when you talk about being an empath and the difficulties of it, learn to work with your power. And breath work, again, is one of those ways. A lot of what causes this is the backup of our emotion anyway. What the pain of taking on other people's emotions is that it is triggering. It's like other people's emotions are like a resonating chamber that's activating that emotion within you. So it's a great clue that you most likely have this emotional baggage inside yourself. And as you're feeling some other people's emotions, it's, you know, catalyzing or entraining to those stored emotions within yourself, which is an indication to start working to release those emotions. When you come to that balanced emotional state in yourself, you'll find that other people's emotional baggage or emotional garbage that comes floating your way will bypass you. You don't have to take it. You can let it go through you and let it keep on going. All right. So hopefully that's helpful and inspirational. And we don't only carry this life trauma. Oh yeah. So talk about that. Yep. So no other comments, and we're getting close to the end. So I just want to leave you with a thought. What if you could allow your emotions to flow without judgment? What if you could get into this place of really feeling your emotions, letting them be there without saying, oh, these are bad, I don't want these, or whatever. I have a feeling you might feel a little less less pain and resistance. You know, you might feel a little self-conscious at first because this is new to a lot of us. But I really think your life become a richer experience. You will be able to enjoy all of what life brings you because you won't be afraid to go down certain avenues because they might bring up certain emotions, and only stick to the the sunny side of the street, so to speak, or walk in the daylight because you're afraid of the night, metaphorically speaking. I think your lives will ultimately be healthier, less pain and resistance. You'll become more intuitively aware. You'll make better choices as a result. When that emotional garbage is cleared out, when you can actually express your emotions, you'll let them inform you so that you can use that information to make a choice rather than have it influencing the background of your consciousness to say, don't go down that street, even if at the end of that street is something that could be very valuable for you, but your stored emotion is cautioning you away from it. So ultimately, you're going to be more aligned with the essence of you, the true intuitive self that comes from your higher consciousness. And this is what I hope for everybody. And this is why I call myself a catalyst for your awakening and transformation. It's my role, my dharma in life to help enlighten not only myself, which is a continuous process, but share information and processes that are going to help others awaken and live much deeper, more satisfying lives. And that's what I hope for all of you. So thanks, Melanie. That resonated, great perspective. And Marie so needed this insight into empathy and energy. Beautiful. Thank you for that. And until next time, namaste. We'll be back here every Friday with Rythmia Live. Oh, if you want to friend me, go ahead and friend me on Facebook. Always remember, add a message that you saw me on Rythmia Live and that you want to continue the conversation. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to give me topics you want to hear more information on, and feel free to just be friends. All right, till then, namaste.